Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this performance-based assessment teaching through thematic units training. I'm Elizabeth Porter, and teaching through thematic units and performance-based assessment, that's one of my passions in education, is helping students apply their learning in meaningful ways and teaching them in ways that are relevant to them and actually involving them in their learning. So this lesson is just going to go over some reasons for performance-based assessment, some reasons for thematic units, and then give an overview of what it is. Performance-based assessment also goes by the name experiential learning, and it's also goes by the name performance-based learning. So I'm a huge advocate of getting rid of tests completely. And I may be on the extreme end of this, but I believe that tests do more harm than good. And research shows, and my own experience shows, that testing is not an accurate measure of a student's learning, of a student's mastery, and it's not an accurate measure of true understanding of a topic. So I believe that test anxiety is a real thing. Testing causes anxiety, a lot of anxiety. And, there are natural pressures in life. However, I believe that on a test, students are more able to show their learning when they are comfortable and when there is no pressure to fail, essentially. So my biggest thing is that we need to get rid of testing. And the even bigger issue here is that I am a huge advocate for getting rid of standardized tests in general. I believe wholeheartedly that standardized tests are a detriment to our education system. There are other countries that are completely performance-based assessment, performance-based learning in their education systems, and their students are achieving far higher results, far higher mastery than in the United States. And we are the only country that tests the way that we do and puts all this pressure on our kids. I also believe, and this is a bit controversial, but I also believe that the testing is a result of a certain curriculum corporation that has got their hands and their money in our education system. So 100% of the time, I opt my kids out of testing. I am very, very, very against standardized testing, and I'm very, very vocal about that. And in my own practices, in my own school, in my own classroom, I don't test. I don't test my students at all because it's just not an accurate measure. It's not an accurate measure of the learning. And because I'm a world language teacher first, it's not an accurate measure of linguistic advancement. And asking kids to produce language before they're ready causes a block. So I think that testing in general should be 100% eliminated. In the world language classroom, also, testing often promotes translation because there's this pressure to get the answer right. So I'm a huge proponent of experiential learning, project-based learning, because it allows the student to apply their knowledge, apply their learning, rather than what I call regurgitating it and forgetting it. I was part of a pilot program several years ago in the state of Washington for culminating projects for seniors. And this was a portfolio-based, they had a small test group go from 8th to 12th grade, and they were going to implement it kindergarten to 12th grade in the future, 8th to 12th grade, and these students made portfolios of their learning. They did not test. They did all projects, and then at the end, they did a culminating project that brought together something they were interested in and basically culminated those years of learning. And I had the privilege of not only working on this project, but also sitting in the presentations of these culminating projects, and they were incredible. Incredible, the amount of learning that happened with these students. And we had students that went from being, one wanted to be in the fashion industry. One, so they basically took what they wanted to do. They shadowed a person in that industry, and they took their learning and they applied it, and they defended it, and they made a presentation, and they practiced their speaking skills, and they were using all of these skills, and it was incredible. So I really, really am an advocate for these types of programs in our schools. And it starts small. It starts with you. It starts with you as the teacher making the decision, if you are able, to remove testing from your curriculum and be 100% thematic unit based. And I hear from a lot of teachers, well, this is great, but this is a lot of work. Projects they don't need to be complicated. They can be simple. They can be as simple as, making your school schedule. They can be as simple as, writing a poem. They don't need to be these humongous projects, although culmination of the thematic unit at the end should be a bigger project. And I'm always doing formative assessments of my students, assessing students without their knowledge, without testing. Students are more likely to achieve and more likely to demonstrate their learning and mastery when they have that anxiety piece taken away, when they don't feel the pressure, and when they feel like they are involved in their own learning and what they're doing. So this is really important, and why I'm such a huge proponent of performance-based assessment. So what is it exactly? What is performance-based assessment, performance-based learning, or experiential learning? Well, first of all, it's an assessment or series of tasks that measure a student's ability to apply skills and knowledge learned from a thematic unit of study. And the key word there is apply. We want our students to show us that not only have they learned and retained the information that we have given them, but we also want our students to show us that they can use those skills in real-world application. And this is really, really important from a thematic unit of study. We want to use thematic units as a way to create relevancy for students, to give them something that they might be interested in. So, you can create a thematic unit study out of a book. You can create it out of an idea. You can create it out of whatever students are interested in. I usually have units like, I have a cafe unit. I have a travel unit. I do a unit on the Little Prince. I have a unit on my, students learning their own identity and where they are in the world. And so we're going to learn and talk about in this training how exactly to set up a thematic unit, how to find the topics for your thematic unit, and how to easily put this into practice. The next part of this is that it challenges students to use higher order thinking skills to create a product or complete a process. This is extremely, extremely important. Higher order thinking skills. We want them to use that prefrontal cortex. We want them to use their executive functioning in their brain. And we want them to be able to use those higher order skills to apply the knowledge, to apply the learning, to create something. that simulates what they would be doing in the real world, or follow directions, follow a process, something that they would be doing in the real world with those skills. Those skills might be decision making. They might be working together in a group as a team, cooperative learning. It might be organization skills. It might be, making reservations or doing things in the world, making connections to people, being polite on the phone. It depends on the age group, but we want our students to use that prefrontal cortex, that those skills that are formed right there in that frontal lobe, to complete the process of the product, because that is the part of the brain that rules all of those skills that we're going to use later in life. The other thing about performance-based assessment is that there are 5 main components. The first is authenticity. It must be authentic to the world. It must be some type of skill or learning that the students will encounter in their lives out in the real world. It must be authentic to them as well. Something that they care about, that gives them motivation, that gives them the desire to actually be involved in this learning. Complexity. On a test, it's fill in the bubble or fill in the blank, or, there might be essay questions, but this is something that has a process, that has steps, that has complexity, that has the students actually using the skills in their brains that require them to do real thinking and think for themselves. I find this to be really, really difficult for students these days. Thinking for themselves, being asked a hard question and having them really think about it. And that is where PBA and PBL are so, so important, is complexity. Having the students actually exercise their frontal lobes. Process or product oriented. We want them to produce something. We want them to do something that leads to a product or an idea or a project. Some things that I do in global citizenship education is we have students find a problem in society and think about how to solve the problem. Maybe there's a problem with homeless people and they want to figure out how to get them warm clothes. We've had students do feeding the hungry. We've had students doing, literacy programs for homeless people, all sorts of things in society. You find a problem and then you work on a project to bring a solution. It can be open-ended. That means that you have an idea of what you want the students to achieve, the skills that you want the students to demonstrate. However, the way that they get there is on them. You give them what we call scaffolded learning or scaffolded parameters, but you leave it open-ended so that they can come to the conclusions and the solutions of the learning on their own. So in the end, it's on them to do the thinking. And the last part is that it has a deadline. Life has deadlines, right? So we want to give a deadline to the students to say, we have this problem and we want to work on this project, or we want to achieve this thing, and this is the date to work on this. So authenticity, complexity, process or product oriented, open-ended, and has a deadline. In future lessons, we are going to go over exactly how to design these units, and each one of these components will be involved in the projects that we create. We're going to create a project together. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the training.